Good morning. My name is Reverend Jenn, and my pronouns are she, her. The year was 1986. I was 12 or 13, taking an art class after school. Now, my daddy, who normally picked me up at home for his weekly visit, would have to pick me up at the school. After I explained the need for the change, he asked me what school I was in these days. Our small town had 3 schools, and I explained I was in the junior high. And he asked which one that was, and I replied it was the school across the railroad tracks. He answered, "Oh, the colored school." Mama had to explain what that one meant. Segregation had ended 20 years before, but minds and ideas seemed to be moving a lot slower. Our town had black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods, a black funeral home and a white one. Interracial marriage had become legal in 1974 in Loving versus Virginia, but violent fistfights broke out on a regular basis about interracial dating. The shadow of the past haunted our present. Dark days and reminders of even darker ones. But I had privilege, and I believed that I would leave the small town South and I would find a world without the shadows. The world that we talked about in school, where all men are created equal. I met my first college-educated, wealthy individual when I was 20. I was engaged to my first husband, and we had traveled to Northern Virginia to meet his family. After a beautiful dinner, we went to Roland's wood-paneled office to sip Grand Marnier and smoke cigars. Needless to say, the little Appalachian girl was impressed. The evening was beautiful until he decided to share a racist joke. I didn't challenge him. I just sat dumbstruck and confused. But I'll never forget asking my husband about it the next day. He seemed surprised and said, "Oh, didn't I mention that Roland's a bigot?" No. I was stunned. You see, I thought I knew what racism looked like. I imagined country folk, poor whites, and crazy men in white suits with pointy hoods. But racism had gone to college. Racism had money, power. Racism even wore suits. I could tell you story after story of what I call everyday racism. Perhaps because I am a white woman. Perhaps because of my accent. Other whites have felt free to share their racist beliefs with me, always expecting a sympathetic ear. In case you're wondering, I don't stay silent anymore when that happens. And I won't. Because racism is not just a relic of our history. It's alive in modern America. We see it in the economic disparities, in the criminal justice system, in healthcare, in education, in the air we breathe and the water we drink. We see it in the ways Black, Indigenous, and people of color are treated differently, judged unfairly, and too often harmed. We hear it, I hear it every time someone uses the phrase DEI hire. From Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. These words remind us that racism is not just an individual failing, but a systemic reality that diminishes us all. They challenge us to step out of comfort, to reject complacency, and to stand on the side of love and justice. Racism is not an issue of the past. It did not end, as I have heard argued on multiple occasions, when Barack Obama was elected president. It is not confined to history books or the days of first slavery and then segregation. It is woven into the fabric of our society, showing up in housing, education, healthcare, employment, and the criminal justice system. Consider these realities. Black Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white Americans, despite similar rates of crime. A 2020 study found that job applicants perceived as black sounding were less likely to receive callbacks compared to applicants with white sounding names. Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women, even when controlling for income and education. These disparities are not accidental. They are not the result of individual failures, but of systems built over centuries to privilege some while oppressing others. And yet many resist the truth. What they say is, we've made so much progress. And yes, progress has been made. The civil rights movement dismantled Jim Crow laws. The Voting Rights Act and Fair Housing Act were passed. Representation in politics and media has grown. But progress is not the same as justice. A wound that has been partially healed can still be reopened. We must resist the temptation to believe that racism is only about individual acts of hate, that it's only about the person using the racial slur or flying a Confederate flag. Racism is not just individual, it's structural. It is embedded in our institutions, laws, and culture. Many of us were taught that racism is about bad people doing bad things. But systemic racism exists even when individuals have good intentions. If a black child and a white child go to different schools, one well-funded, one underfunded, racism is at work, even if no one in the school intends harm. If banks consistently deny black families home loans at higher rates than white families, racism is at work, even if no banker harbors personal hatred. Systemic racism means that our history continues to shape our present. It means that the racist policies of the past, such as redlining, segregation, and mass incarceration, still impact communities today. It's why it's not enough to just be not racist. We must be actively anti-racist. We must dismantle the systems that uphold inequality, even when it makes us uncomfortable. We have to ask, how have I benefited from racial privilege? How have I unknowingly participated in systems of oppression? How can I listen learn, and grow. This is not about guilt. It's about responsibility. Because we can't change what we refuse to acknowledge. Too often, conversations about race are met with resistance. And folks say, I don't see color. Why we got to bring up race? But ignoring race does not erase racism. In fact, it often allows it to persist unchecked. Pretending that racial disparities don't exist overlooks the deeply rooted inequalities that continue to shape society, from economic opportunities to access to education and health care. Colorblindness may seem like a noble ideal, but in practice, it dismisses the lived experience of marginalized communities and the systemic barriers that they face. Addressing racism requires acknowledging its presence, understanding its impact, and actively working to dismantle the structures that uphold it. True equality is not achieved by looking away, but by confronting injustice head on. Faith is not just about belief. Faith is about action. We can advocate for policies that address racial inequality, such as fair housing laws, criminal justice reform, and equitable education funding. We can support Black-owned businesses and organizations working for justice. We can challenge racism in our own communities, workplaces, and families. None of us will do this work perfectly, but perfection is not the goal. Progress is. The only unacceptable response is silence. Conversations about race can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is part of growth. Too often, when we cry out, I'm not racist, or I don't see color. But anti-racism is not about proving we're good people. It's about building a better world. And some people may ask, is change really possible? Yes, it is. History shows us that change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. The abolitionists, the civil rights activists, the organizers of today, they remind us that transformation is possible. The road is long, but we don't walk alone. May we not lose heart. May we not be overwhelmed. Instead, may we move forward with faith, courage, and with a commitment to justice. We are builders of the beloved community. We are keepers of justice. And we ain't done yet. May we leave this space renewed in spirit, open in heart, and ready for action. May love be not just a feeling, but a force. And may we always, always choose justice. Amen, shalom, and blessed be.